So I wanted to respond to a couple of the comments. I had questions and things that people have written about on Facebook. After this is in regards to the shooting that recently happened in Las Vegas, which I was a few blocks away from and was able to go and talk to a few people afterwards and capture some of the footage, mostly of the SWAT teams, the people that essentially were there, first responders, so on and so forth. A few people have posted photos of what supposedly is a photo of the person who committed the attack from the 30-second story, and they were offended by the fact, and I didn't take it down because, quite honestly, the most important thing for me to be able to have on Facebook is essentially an open forum. I don't adhere to any political party, just so everybody understands this, nor do I find it necessarily important for me to agree with everybody who posts things on there. I would only ask that people, if they do post things, please remain respectful towards each other. So name dropping, name calling, not necessarily my favorite thing that people do on there, and it's sort of when you do that, it loses a little bit of your own credibility because, of course, it goes back into what I consider to be a bit of a temper tantrum. First and foremost, let me say that what I witnessed in Vegas, unfortunately, it's on the mass scale. It's not the first time I have been around a shooting, as many of you probably know, or been in the crossfire or caught in the crossfire as a civilian. And I have lost people, both in the military and in the civilian world, to gunfire and gunshots and gun violence. So it's something that's personal to me, not just because of my close proximity to what happened at the time that it happened, but a couple things that I wanted to touch on there. Really, I was left that day with a little bit of compassion that I saw with people afterwards. And what I mean by that is right across from there was the casino, if anybody is familiar with Vegas, the Hooters casino that basically closed down. I had walked in there afterwards and it looked like a living morgue. There were people that were sleeping on the ground. They were covered in blankets that the casino had provided them. They were at that time disallowed because the streets were blocked off to go back to Mandalay Bay or other casinos that they had stayed at, because they all essentially came from the concert. And so there was a mass feeling of, I guess, paranoia and sort of shock in the air with everybody that had been there right afterwards. Part of the issue that I deal with here is I think sometimes people get confused. And I understand that people don't want to necessarily see media and see brutal photos and see whatnot that's on there that sort of happen afterwards. They think it may be disrespectful to some of the people that have passed away. Of course, I don't want to say I agree or disagree with this. I come from my personal perspective. Last year, even when I was diagnosed with cancer, I made a decision right then and there that if I was terminally ill and I was starting to slowly deplete during that time, that I would actually have made a film about that and I would have documented the whole thing. That's, of course, my life. That's my decision and my choice to do so. I think otherwise, maybe it's because I've been in a way desensitized and come from a journalistic background. I feel that this sort of information does need to be made public, and people do need to have at least the option of being able to go and see that.
This is a really sad and tragic event, and I'm really uncomfortable with what may come of this, especially in terms of gun control, because I think this country needs the right to bear arms. This is another strike against that. And it's unfortunate that people feel the necessity to open fire on innocent people. I'm of the personal belief it's because of the system by which we operate, the fact that people are not raised with what they need. We have a society of people who are not raised with what they need, and they lack what they need. This is going to become more commonplace, and it's a tragedy.
It's important for me, and I love all of you guys, especially the ones that have differing perspectives and points of view and opinions that differ from mine. It's important for me to have in life. I am not going to ever in my life learn anything or be challenged in my own ideas or my views or how I look at things by being around similarly minded people. That's not the way it works for me. So it's important for me, and I love all of you guys, agree or disagree, who are on my Facebook. It's sort of impossible to prevent this sort of stuff from happening. We can ban guns, we can ban ammunition, or we can prevent people from being able to have it, and we're going to certainly create more obstacles, but I don't think there's any way of completely preventing this. And of course, there's music festivals all over the world. What makes me sad is that this guy just changed up the game. This is the first time that it wasn't a bomb that went off in a parking lot during a sporting event, or something that was set up like that, or a shooter that went into a school. This was actually something that was extremely well thought out, well planned. This took a lot of planning and ingenuity on the part of one person. And I think it's extremely unfair if you just want to disclude and discount this guy as being crazy, because the moment you do that, what you're doing essentially is not looking at what the impetus was for this to happen. And that's really the why behind everything is the most important thing for me. If you don't know the why, then there is the inability to ever be able to move forward, progress, and prevent these sort of things from happening in the future. Questions that I'd like to know. Was this person prior military? Did he have PTSD? Did he get into a recent fight with his wife or girlfriend or somebody else? Did he recently lose his job? Had he gone to the doctor and found out he was terminally ill? Did he have insurance? All of these things are important small factors. Did he piss away a lot of money at the casino that he was at? Apparently he was a high roller. I mean, he rented a suite there, and apparently he played there quite a bit, and was, from what I understand so far, and it could also be misinformation, a pretty avid gambler, and somebody that went there quite often. All these things are things that need to be looked at and need to be talked about. And I feel like there's so much finger pointing in so many different areas, and much of it is not necessarily a cohesive thing. And just to make clear on this, when people come and they do have opinions, or they leave something on there, I understand it's hard sometimes to separate yourself from what's happening, the emotional response that you have, from actually what the facts are. The emotional responses, however, oftentimes are held back to, going back to being temper tantrums in a way. As I said earlier, I don't adhere to any political party, and so I don't vote. I'm not a Trump voter. I'm not a anti-Trump voter. I'm not pro-Hillary or anti-Hillary. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 presidents later to see the effects of what one president did. And right now we are in a living example of that, when we basically are still in Iraq after the original Bush went in there and didn't necessarily finish things. But back then, had he gone in there and lopped off Saddam Hussein's head, people would also be up in arms, because how dare we go in there and do this? And so these are the unknown factors and the unknown elements, and a lot of the things are very much infused, and it's got to be more of a cohesive thought. Otherwise, it turns into basically the kind of temper tantrum that's reactive, like a 7-year-old falling off of a bicycle and scratching their knee. I understand people are hurting. I understand people are angry. I understand people are worried. I'm worried too. I do worry about the future generations and kids in the United States and in America, because I live here. I pay taxes like you guys do. I go out in public. If somebody wanted to get at me, I don't run around with a Kevlar vest. They would get at me, But it shouldn't take 60 people, or nearly 60 people dying and over 500 plus injured, for us at that one moment to actually forget about our backgrounds, who we come from, and focus on our differences at that time, and finally be able to realize that we are all Americans, and we all are here sort of trying to live a better life and progress and move forward and create something better, hopefully, for future generations. That's part of the sad part. I feel if something isn't done and something doesn't change and we don't get to the heart of the problem, then within 6 to 9 months from now, I'm going to be at the same table addressing another issue that hopefully I wasn't actually in close proximity with and don't have photos from or interview footage from. I filmed during that time. Had there been people that would have been injured, my camera would not be in my hand. I would have been offering any sort of life-saving support or carrying people, even with being injured myself, to safety as best I would be able to do. But an effort like this, and something that is going to essentially create any sort of a difference, is going to have to be a proactive approach. Now, they started a GoFundMe account, and I think the last I heard, and granted, it's been a while, it's probably far over this amount, but it hit over $2 million of the GoFundMe account for the victims. I do remember a program a few years back in Los Angeles, I believe, when they were offering people $300 to $400 per unregistered guns, assault rifles, anything like that before the holidays. And a lot of people came in, they turned in their guns basically, and they traded it for money that they could use to buy their families gifts or use it around the holidays and around Christmas time. $2 million would certainly take a lot of guns off of the street at $300 to $400 a pop. The problem is, even with doing so, there is not necessarily any sort of ability to be able to see how that would make a difference, nor would somebody that's really hell-bent on this be able to, prevent them from doing this sort of an attack. We, in this country, have the inability to prevent tens of thousands of pounds daily of heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine and other drugs being shipped into the States from overseas, everywhere from Afghanistan through Mexico, through different parts of even Canada. How logically do you think you are going to prevent people from owning guns and running around with guns? What are you going to implore security-wise to actually prevent this? If every single time that Al-Qaeda or ISIS would make a threat to the United States and say, hey, we plan on doing an attack during this, and we raise our threat levels, and everybody goes on hot shit alert basically at airports, you eventually are going to bankrupt the American economy by making everybody go around and jump in circles. what eventually would it be like if every single hotel basically came through and told people you can bring luggage only up to 50 pounds now? How is that going to change where people travel?
Fell in love with music festivals last year, but I'm never going to a mass concert again. And that's because you don't know. You have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea if you're going to be in the crowd when the gunshots go off. You have no idea if you're going to be the victim or if you're going to be a family member of the victim. And it's just unfortunate that this happened, but I have no interest in being a part of large crowds anymore.
Madness happens, and you think it's like not real life, and then you run, and then tripping over everything and trying to find your friends, and just trying to find shelter, pretty much. And we felt the air from the bullets, and it was really scary. So,
with every single new terrorist attack, and I do call it a terrorist attack because to me, terrorist is anything that incites terror into a certain area. It doesn't have to be from ISIS or Al Qaeda or Abu Sayyaf or Black September or any of those other groups. Every single one of these chips away slowly at the pieces of Americana, of us going and visiting. That's ultimately what we work for, to go to venues, to go to concerts, to enjoy outdoor festivals, to enjoy different activities. And an attack like this, of this magnitude, done by just one person supposedly so far, whether there was 2 or 3 people involved. 2 or 3 people involved in some ways is more scarier, because you have 3 different people who would have come together with a certain idea and carried this whole thing out. That's much more scary than, I think, for me anyway, one person going through and planning this and somehow being able to get away with it. But every time that you do this, this affects Disneyland, this affects Disney World, this affects families going out on picnics, this affects how people feel in crowds now when they go into concerts. This is affecting all of those things. And at what rate and at what level do you go through and do you change something like this? What needs to change for it? I fear, personally, if you ended up taking all the guns in a perfect world, many of you would like to think, if you took all the guns away from every single gun owner in the United States, so nobody here was armed, what the government then would be able to do would be far worse, depending on whose hands it fell into, than anything that we've seen. And 60 people wouldn't be a concern when you compare that to something like the 12 million of a certain group that died during World War II, who also, the agenda of the government at that time in Nazi Germany was to disarm everybody and every citizen. And of course, with a strong military, everybody should feel protected. But then the ideology switches and changes a little bit, and you see that you are on the receiving end of it without a way to essentially be able to fight back. People will always find a way to go through and cause mass destruction, death, murder, chaos in every single way and form that they would like to be able to do. And if it's not this, it could be a bomb. It could be something that was created. Timothy McVeigh is the one thing that comes to mind. Airplanes is another thing. There are plenty of things that are destructive enough. And without actually getting to the impetus of why somebody would do something like that, I feel that we're just going to be chasing our tail. We're going to be in disagreements on a lot of things. And I, for one, am one of those people. I actually don't have an opinion one way or the next, really, on gun control or not. To me, I don't personally own guns. I mean, I have 3 in the basement. They came with the house that I live in. I've never pulled them out, never shot them. Last time I shot any sort of M16 was actually in basic training in 2004. So it's been 13 years. I'm not a gun nut. Doesn't really interest me that much. I don't collect them. I don't own them. I have neighbors who do. Sometimes they shoot some of the gophers or whatever else I have in the front yard from their front porch. They sit there and they shoot at my house with gophers that I have. Doesn't really bother me. It's never bothered me. It is something that again, I hope people can remain respectful when they talk about this with each other, because this is certainly going to be a problem. That if we are going to be split into 2 subclasses, if there's going to be a right and there's going to be a left, and there's going to be that sort of mindset, it's probably going to culminate again with me 3, 6, 9 months from now being at the same table and giving the same message again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your comments. Thanks you for those of you who have posted. And more importantly, thank you for many of you who disagree with me and can put it in a tangible sort of form that is not emotionally based and is not on the level of being a temper tantrum. Thank you for that.